Oh, this is kind of a fun one. Because I don't like the question. I mean, I like the question, but I don't like the terminology. So maybe, but it's a good one. Joseph asked, can you guys talk about perfectionism and when it's good and bad? I don't like the term perfectionism.
Yeah,
I think perfectionism is a word that people use that don't know how to let things go. I think perfectionism is a word that people use when they talk about what mostly what people mean is perfection paralysis, which is you're scared to let the thing go out into the world because it's not perfect and you're just scared. I mean, that's really what it is. There is no such thing as perfection. Perfection is a concept that we created as an ideal to go towards. So it's great to try to make, something that Eric Valentine said, which I loved years ago. And I think we were meeting with Taking Back Sunday. And by we, I mean, he was meeting with Taking Back Sunday and I was his assistant who sat there. And he said, and I've heard him say this a few times, I'm trying to make the best record ever, every time. So that should be the goal. You should be trying to make your best work, the best work, etc.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing as perfection. So this idea of perfectionism is either everybody is that way or nobody's that way. Like everybody wants their shit to be great. You want it to be as good as possible. But the idea of, oh, it's not perfect. I'm going to take days and days and days to tweak on things that don't matter. And now I'm not sure. And look, we all get into the place where we lose our minds trying to make something amazing. But perfection paralysis is a real thing. I know very, very talented people who don't finish things because they're just scared that it's not perfect. And that's about fear. It's not about being a perfectionist. It's not a compliment. It's you're afraid. And there's nothing wrong with being afraid. We're all afraid. We're all afraid of lots of things. But you got to get over that and put things out into the world and play them for people and get it done. Somebody said Dr. Luke does not agree. I'd love to talk to Luke about it. But the reality is there is no such thing as perfection, and people got to stop calling themselves perfectionists. That's the part that bugs me is people being like, well, I'm such a perfectionist. It's like everybody wants their shit to be great. I lose my mind over stuff, but that's not an excuse.
Yeah, there's something to say about the objective person in the room, whether it's the producer, manager, A&R, someone that their job is to take a step back constantly and can just tell that the 30th iteration of the record isn't right yet, but there's inherent magic here, and it's worth pursuing in a healthy way. That's where the perfectionism doesn't really make any sense, because no one's looking for something to be perfect. It's just a language mishap there. No one's in the room. It's gotta be perfect. Like if they're saying that, they don't mean that. They're looking for it to click, to feel like the thing that's in their brain, which is so hard to do. It's like imagine being a painter and like you can visualize what you want on the canvas, but you just can't figure it out quite yet, and you're constantly painting over it and making layers, and that's what we're doing with sound. Like the bass might not be right on version 2. It might have been right on 1, and it takes 40 iterations to realize that 1 was the right thing, because that sounds excessive. But I don't want to discount really successful records that have been through that many iterations, right? Like the Billie Jean score of 82 mixes and
totally.
2. So, but I like your point, which is it's not perfectionism. That's waiting for it all to click and realize and saying this is done.
That's finishing, which can be a difficult, long problem, which we've talked about for 2 hours. There's 2 full episodes that people haven't watched. I don't remember which ones they were. Maybe someone in the chat. But we did 2 full hours on the idea of finishing records, which is different than people being like, I'm a perfectionist. But continue. Yes, I'm with you.
But somebody, the adult in the room, as I'd like to put it, has to be like, but this record is special. Yeah. Like this melody is worth fighting for, and the bass isn't supporting the melody yet. The production isn't at the level of this song, right? That's a common thing. That's a common thing where like the producers are just not quite at the level of maybe the songwriter that's in the room, and it's overproduced, and we're hiding the greatness that is this like raw, this raw vocal performance written by whoever, whether it's Sarah Aarons or Julia Michaels or someone that's just giving us this kind of real raw thing, and the producers in the room are just like slamming on it, and they're just like pumping bass. You're like, wait a second, hold on. Like someone's got to say, hey, we just hear it without the bass. And you know what? That could take a week. It could take a week to get the bass right. but as long as you're taking perspective breaks and healthily moving in and out of the creative process, like, I don't see that being a negative thing.
Yes,
people, people work on songs for years, but they come in and out of it. They're not only working on one song for 365 days. That's neuroses at play.
Yeah, I think there's many. I fully agree with you, and I just want to separate it because, of course, like, the biggest record I have took a year to get right. Right. It's because we had a demo. We tried a bunch of different productions. Then we got it to an artist producer. Then he did a version. Then we got in the studio and I'm all for taking the time. What I hear a lot of times when people talk about being a perfectionist, they are people that don't. I guess I'll say it like this: if you've been in the position a number of times where you go, okay, it sounds finished. If you have an instinct for what finished is. Those people don't tend to call themselves perfectionists, because a record being finished is very different than a record being perfect. And Miggy makes a good point in the chat here. It's interesting. It's interesting how sometimes our perception of other people's work can seem perfect. And that's very true. I listen to a lot of other records and I go, that's perfect. But I know from making a lot of great records with a lot of great people, the people who are making it don't go, this is a perfect record, this is the best. Because everybody who's working on things, you're like, this is the best version of this is finished. But the idea that anything I've ever made is perfect, or anything you've ever made is perfect, and I'm sure that the records that I think are perfect, I'm confident that the people who made those are like, yeah, well, we had to compromise this, and maybe we would have done this. But that's the magic of this thing that we do, there's imperfect variables that go along with it that make things special and unique, which is, art is not supposed to be perfect. Art is supposed to be emotional, authentic, effective, whatever.
I tend to feel being a finisher, and someone that has finished thousands of records, so I guess I'm allowed to say that I am one. I think there are a lot of unfinished sounding records out there right now that are coming out. And that's the word I would use. I wouldn't say that they're not perfect. I would just say they sound unfinished. They sound so dense that the focal point of the records are not, are not compelling enough, and there's too much in the way of it. I would rarely say there's not enough stuff, that it's too empty, which is very rare. I think Billie Eilish and Phineas know how to finish records. They sound like complete ideas, and a lot of them are barren. A lot of it is very stripped back production, but they all sound like, and they're known as perfectionists, right? They're self-proclaimed in the documentary that they're perfectionists, whatever. But Phineas just knows how to finish a record. He's a producer. He's probably going to be, if not already, one of the best of our time of understanding what it's like to say, this is done. And I'm sure he's labored for weeks, months, over a year on a record. But his stuff sounds finished. There are a lot of records that don't, and it's really, it's nice to hear when something just sounds like a complete, concise idea. It's not often.
And I think again, if folks haven't watched it, we did 2 hours on the topic of finishing records, which I think are well worth your time if you're interested in the topic.